The man who refuses to explain himself is dangerous for one reason: his boundaries cannot be audited. Most people are incredibly easy to decode. They want to be understood. They want to be validated. They want to ensure that every action they take is viewed through the exact right lens by the people around them. Offer them a slight misunderstanding, and they will empty their pockets trying to correct it. But when a man can sit comfortably inside a false assumption without rushing to defend his reputation, a strange shift begins. His silence stops being an absence of words. It becomes a presence of power. Other people lose their leverage. The desperate need for approval evaporates, and the deeper truth is darker. The ability to withhold your reasons does not just build an aura of mystery. It changes who controls the room. I learned this by watching people lose arguments they had already won. A man sets a firm limit with a friend. The friend acts slightly offended. Suddenly the man starts talking. He lists his reasons. He justifies his schedule. He explains how stressed he has been lately. He thinks he is softening the blow. He is actually bleeding leverage. The problem isn't the boundary. The problem is that his need to be perceived as reasonable became a button, and whoever knows which button makes you anxious can begin predicting you. That is where the architecture of over-explanation becomes a strategic liability. Control rarely begins with someone aggressively demanding your submission. Sometimes it begins with someone simply discovering what happens when they withhold their understanding. A raised eyebrow, a long pause, a deliberate misinterpretation of your motives. Once your discomfort with tension becomes visible, your behavior becomes easier to direct. Think about the person who questions your decision, and suddenly you find yourself delivering a 3-minute monologue to justify an action that only required a one-word answer. You think you are protecting your reputation, but perhaps you are just reacting to the panic of being temporarily disliked. And that distinction changes everything, because refusing to explain yourself isn't simply about being quiet. It is learning to sit inside the discomfort of another person's judgment long enough to discover what their judgment is trying to extract from you: your time, your compliance, your position. By the end of this, you will recognize a pattern you have probably been participating in for years without realizing the cost. You will understand why your desperate need for clarity is the exact mechanism keeping you trapped in conversations you should have walked away from. And you will see why refusing to explain yourself isn't arrogance. It is the ultimate form of self-respect. The trap usually begins with a concept we are taught to admire: communication. The word communication is where people quietly lose control. You have been taught that explanation is a virtue, that if you simply arrange the facts logically, the other person will see reality the way you do. You feel that immediate hot spike in your chest when someone gets you wrong. The overwhelming urge to open your mouth and fix the narrative. But in the realm of power dynamics, explanation is rarely about facts. It is an involuntary submission of data. It is a negotiation where you are bidding against yourself. Whenever you explain a decision that does not strictly require an explanation, you are subconsciously picking up the burden of proof. What does that actually mean? In any interaction, the person who holds the burden of proof is the one submitting to the other person's frame. You place the other person in the position of the judge, and a judge does not negotiate. A judge evaluates. Every additional detail you offer is a signal that you do not fundamentally believe you had the authority to make the decision in the first place. You are asking for permission after the fact. That is a very different thing than communicating. Think about a conversation at work. You decline a request to take on a project that falls outside your responsibilities. The person asking does not argue with you. They just pause. They look at you, slightly confused, and say, "Oh, I thought you were looking to step up this quarter." It is a tiny provocation, barely visible. If you are ruled by the need to be understood, you will immediately rush to fill the silence. You will explain your current workload. You will list the other 3 projects you are handling. You will assure them that you are still committed to the team's success. From the outside, it looks like a reasonable exchange. Underneath, it is a surrender of power, because the other person isn't listening to your reasons. They are listening to your anxiety. They are measuring how easily you can be pulled off your center. Once they realize that a single sentence can make you abandon your silence and begin defending your character, you become predictable. They have found the mechanism to bypass your boundaries. This vulnerability stems from a deeply ingrained instinct. When we are young, explanation is survival. If the authority figures in our lives understand our motives, we are safe from punishment. We carry this instinct into adulthood, believing that if we can just make the other person truly understand, the conflict will disappear. But in adult power dynamics, understanding is often withheld strategically. People will deliberately pretend not to understand you, simply to watch you exhaust yourself trying to explain. Because while you are busy defending your logic, you are not paying attention to their strategy. Your desire for clarity blinds you to their leverage, and this is where the unseen tax of being reasonable is collected. When you over-explain, you reveal far more than the details of your schedule or the logic of your choices. You reveal what you value, you reveal what you fear losing. If you justify your actions by saying, "I just didn't want to upset you," you have handed them the keys to your behavior. They now know that the threat of their displeasure is enough to control you. If you justify your actions by proving how hard you worked, they know that attacking your work ethic will always force a reaction. You treat your reasons as currency, handing them out to anyone who looks at you with a question mark. But here is the darker implication. When you over-explain, you teach the people around you that your initial no is merely a starting position. It is an opening bid. You teach them that if they just apply a little pressure, a raised eyebrow, a period of silence, a subtle guilt trip, you will eventually provide them with the exact tools they need to dismantle your boundary. You hand over your reasons, hoping they will grant you peace, but reasons are tools. And when you give your reasons to someone who does not fundamentally respect your boundaries, you are not giving them context. You are giving them ammunition. The question is no longer, can I make them understand? The more dangerous question becomes, what happens when they use my explanation to start taking me apart? Most manipulation does not arrive wearing a mask of hostility. It arrives disguised as confusion. Someone looks at you, tilts their head, and says, "I just don't understand why you would make that choice." It sounds like an invitation to connect. It sounds like a genuine opportunity to clear the air. But in many cases, it is a sophisticated form of data mining. They are not asking for an explanation because they are confused. They are asking for an explanation because they want to see how hard you will work to make them comfortable. Imagine a friend or a partner who constantly crosses small boundaries. You finally pull back. You stop initiating contact. You enforce a quiet distance. Instead of acknowledging their own behavior, they send a message. "Are you mad at me? I feel like you've been so cold lately." Your instinct, driven by the desire to be a reasonable, mature adult, is to explain yourself. You type out a long paragraph. You explain how busy work has been. You carefully mention that one thing they did last week, cushioning it with reassurances that you still value the relationship. You want them to know you aren't being vindictive. You just need space. You hit send, feeling like you have communicated effectively. You haven't. You have just rewarded their provocation. They did not have to take accountability for their actions. All they had to do was feign confusion, and you immediately did the emotional labor of managing the relationship. You provided the data. You revealed that you are afraid of being perceived as cold. You proved that their mild disappointment is enough to make you abandon your silence and start working for their approval. And now they know the exact mechanism to pull you back in whenever you try to walk away. This happens because of a trap built entirely around a single concept: the trap of being reasonable. The word reasonable is where intelligent men quietly lose control of their lives. You want to be seen as a logical man, a man who does things for good reasons. You believe that if you simply lay out your rationale, the other person will be forced to respect it. But in a power dynamic, logic is rarely the primary language being spoken. When you bring a logical defense to a psychological game, you are bringing a map to a chess match. You are trying to navigate. They are trying to win. If someone's hidden objective is to make you doubt yourself, or to test the structural integrity of your boundaries, your perfectly constructed, three-point logical explanation is useless to them. In fact, it is exactly what they want. Because as long as you are explaining, you are on trial. Think about the physical reality of an explanation. When you explain yourself to someone who has challenged your boundary, you are literally leaning in. You are expending energy. You are generating words, adjusting your tone, reading their facial expressions to see if they are finally satisfied. You are doing all the work, and they are sitting back, arms crossed, evaluating your performance. The longer you talk, the lower your status drops. You could have the most airtight, philosophically sound justification in the world. It does not matter. The sheer volume of your words communicates insecurity. A 3-minute justification for a one-word decision signals that you do not believe your decision is inherently valid. It tells the room that your authority requires external underwriting. Someone who possesses true leverage does not negotiate their right to use it. They simply exercise it. So what happens when you refuse to play? What happens when someone deliberately misinterprets your action and you refuse to correct the record? They are constructing a false reality and inviting you to step inside it to fix it. You didn't invite me because you're embarrassed of me, aren't you? If you say, no, that's not it at all. I just thought, you have already lost. Accepted the premise that your actions need their clearance. The man who understands leverage simply watches them build the false reality. He doesn't move into it. He doesn't frantically patch the holes in their logic. He looks at the accusation, recognizes it as a trap, and lets it sit there, unanswered. Imagine the workplace scenario again. The colleague questions your refusal to take on extra work. I thought you were looking to step up this quarter. Instead of explaining your workload, you look at them, you let the silence hang in the air for just a second too long, and then you say, I'm passing on this one, period. No conjunctions, no because, no apologies padded with corporate jargon. Suddenly, the entire physics of the conversation inverts. You have not given them any material to work with. You have not handed them a reason they can debate, minimize, or dismantle. You have left the awkwardness entirely on their side of the table. This is where strategic silence becomes devastating. When you do not fill the void with an apology or a defense, the other person's manipulation loses its camouflage. If they were genuinely asking for information, they will simply accept your answer and move on. But what if they were testing a boundary? The silence will agitate them. They will realize that their usual mechanism, provoking your anxiety to extract compliance, has failed. They might try another tactic. They might act offended. They might make a passive-aggressive comment. They might label you as difficult. Let them. Their reaction is information. By refusing to explain yourself, you force them to reveal how they operate when they cannot easily control you. You are letting their discomfort do the work that your explanation used to do. It sounds simple. Just stop talking, just let the boundary stand. But if you have ever tried to hold that silence, you know it is agonizing. The pressure in your chest builds. Your mind screams at you to just say something, anything, to break the tension, to make them smile again, to restore the feeling of being liked. And this is where we reach a much darker problem. The reason you over-explain is not always because the other person is a master manipulator. Sometimes, the most sophisticated manipulator in the room is the version of you that refuses to sit with discomfort. We usually think of leverage as something another person holds over us. A boss holds your paycheck, a partner holds your affection, a client holds your reputation, but the most sophisticated manipulator in your life is rarely sitting across the table. It is the version of you that refuses to sit with discomfort. Your own ego holds leverage over you. Your pride holds leverage. Your desperate need to be perceived as intelligent, reasonable, and correct can dictate your behavior more thoroughly than any external threat. When that heavy silence stretches out after you refuse to explain yourself, the panic you feel is not actually about the other person. It is a negotiation happening entirely inside your own mind. Your present self sits across the table from your future self and tries to make a deal. The present self wants the immediate dopamine hit of setting the record straight. It wants the pleasure of proving the other person wrong. It wants to deliver the perfect counter-argument that forces the room to nod and say, "Ah, that makes sense. You are justified." The future self pays the cost, because the future self loses the mystery, the boundary, and the absolute authority that comes from not needing their approval. It is remarkable how easily, just to feel understood for 5 minutes, we trade long-term leverage for short-term validation. Think about what happens when you explain your boundary. You are secretly hoping the other person will validate it. You are offering your reasons like a child, handing in homework, waiting for a grade. But look closely at the structure of that dynamic. It requires them to be the judge of your reality. Every time you justify your position to someone who has no right to demand it, you are teaching your own nervous system a very dangerous lesson. You are teaching your mind that your decisions are not fully real until someone else signs off on them. That evidence slowly becomes your identity. A man who cannot trust his own boundaries without external validation has to constantly monitor how others perceive him. He has to manage their moods. He has to perform his competence. He has to make sure his narrative is perfectly understood by people who do not even have his best interests in mind. That is not social intelligence. That is exhausting dependence. What happens when you stop managing their perception? This is where the psychology of over-explaining shifts from a behavioral habit to a fundamental question of identity. If you can finally conquer your ego's demand for immediate validation, you unlock one of the most unsettling and effective strategies in human dynamics. You discover the profound power of letting people be wrong about you. Most men believe that strength means projecting absolute dominance. They believe that every slight must be corrected. Every false assumption must be dismantled immediately. If someone assumes they are less successful, less intelligent, or less connected than they actually are, their ego screams at them to fix the narrative. They pull out their credentials. They casually drop names. They reveal their plans. They explain their entire strategy because the pleasure of correcting the other person is irresistible. But what did they actually gain? A few seconds of shallow respect from someone who was already willing to underestimate them. What did they lose? Information asymmetry. In the architecture of strategy, appearing weaker or less informed than you are is not a vulnerability, it is a tool. When someone underestimates you, they drop their guard, they stop performing. They reveal exactly how they treat people. They believe have nothing to offer them. You see who becomes dismissive. You observe who interrupts. You notice who casually attempts to take credit for your work. You watch how they navigate the conversation when they think they hold all the cards. They are giving you the exact blueprint of their character, completely unfiltered. And they are doing it voluntarily. If you rush to correct their false assumption, they will instantly adjust their behavior. They will put the mask back on. They will start treating you with the cautious respect they reserve for people they perceive as a threat or an asset. You purchased their respect, but you destroyed your ability to see who they actually are. The strategist lets the false assumption stand. He allows the other person to operate on bad intelligence. Imagine you are in a high-stakes conversation, and the other person assumes you do not understand a particular detail. They explain it to you condescendingly. The amateur gets offended. He interrupts to prove his competence. He wants the room to know he is smart. The man who controls his ego stays quiet. He nods. He lets them believe they hold the intellectual advantage, because as long as they think you are blind, they will show you exactly where they are hiding the knife. Oh, that is the difference between purchasing status and retaining power. Status demands to be seen immediately. Power prefers to observe quietly. Once you internalize this, you stop needing the room to understand you. You allow someone to misjudge your intentions, miscalculate your resources, and underestimate your resolve. And you feel no panic whatsoever, because you are no longer playing the game of being understood. You are playing the game of accurate observation. This changes your entire relationship with criticism and false accusations. When someone insults you by completely misunderstanding your motive, they are actually offering you a gift. They are showing you the exact limits of their perception. They are revealing the lens through which they view the world. If you defend yourself, you are helping them see you more clearly. Why would you do their work for them? Let them be blind. Let them construct a false narrative. Let them fight a ghost while they are busy shadowboxing the version of you they invented in their head. You are gathering the raw data necessary to outmaneuver them. In reality, this is strategic restraint. Not suppression for its own sake, but refusing to pay a permanent price for a temporary emotional reward. And there is a paradox here. The more capable you become of withholding your explanations, the more easily you are actually understood by the people who matter. You stop polluting your relationships with defensive noise. You stop negotiating your reality with people committed to misunderstanding you. Your words regain their weight. But there is one final test that exposes whether this transformation is real. It does not happen when a stranger insults you. It does not happen in a boardroom negotiation where the rules are clear. The true test arrives when you are forced to remain silent while someone else takes the credit you technically earned. The ultimate test of this identity does not arrive when a stranger insults you. It arrives when you are forced to watch someone else claim the victory you engineered. You are in a room. A conversation is happening. A colleague, or perhaps a rival, casually repeats an idea you developed. They present it as their own. The room nods. The authority figure at the table praises them for their insight. Your ego instantly catches fire. Every instinct in your body demands that you clear your throat and correct the record. You want to casually mention the email you sent yesterday. You want to re-establish ownership. You want the room to know that you are the architect. If you speak up, you might get the credit back, but you will reveal exactly how hungry you are for applause. The man who understands the long game does something completely unnatural in this moment. He leans back. He lets them take the credit. Why would you ever let someone steal what belongs to you? Because you are observing the architecture of a much larger game. When someone steals your idea, they are purchasing a liability they do not understand. They have the concept, but they do not possess the internal machinery that generated it. When the room starts asking complex follow-up questions, when the idea requires execution, when the pressure mounts, they will have to defend a territory they do not actually own. You get to watch them struggle. More importantly, the truly dangerous people in that room, the ones who possess actual observation skills, already know where the idea came from. If you fight for the credit, you look like a frantic employee begging for a gold star. If you sit quietly and watch the thief perform, you look like a king, watching a jester play with a stolen crown. The crown doesn't make him the king. And your silence proves that you know it. This principle extends far beyond a boardroom. It applies to the end of a relationship, the collapse of a friendship, or a public falling out. The other person will inevitably spin a narrative that makes you the villain. They will tell mutual friends that you were unreasonable. They will rewrite history to ensure they remain the victim in their own story. Your instinct will be to pull out the receipts, to show the text messages, to build a waterproof case proving your innocence and their guilt. You think you are protecting your reputation. You are actually just bleeding energy into a void. When you exhaust yourself trying to correct the narrative of a person who is committed to misunderstanding you, you validate their reality. You signal that their opinion of you still dictates your emotional weather. The strategist does not issue a press release. He lets the false narrative exist. He allows people to believe the lie, because he understands a brutal truth about human nature. Anyone who is eager to believe the worst version of you without ever asking for your side was never truly an ally to begin with. The lie is doing you a favor. It is filtering the room. It is removing the weak, the easily manipulated, and the disloyal from your perimeter. Why would you interrupt a process that is cleaning your environment for free? This is the transition from a reactive state to an unbribable identity. When you no longer need the world to view you accurately, the world can no longer use your reputation as a hostage. You stop over-explaining. You stop over-justifying. You stop attempting to control the invisible thoughts inside other people's heads. And ironically, this is when you become truly intimidating. People do not know how to handle a man who does not defend himself against a false accusation. It short-circuits their programming. Are accustomed to people who panic when their status is threatened. When you do not panic, when you simply look at them, acknowledge their statement, and refuse to engage in a trial, they begin to doubt their own power. They wonder what you know that they don't. They wonder if their trap was actually a trap, or if they just walked into yours. The desire to explain yourself is fundamentally a desire to be saved. You want the other person to save you from the discomfort of their disapproval. Mastery is realizing that you do not need to be saved, because their disapproval is not a weapon. It is just a sound, but this requires brutal self-honesty. You have to look at the interactions you engage in every day and ask yourself a series of uncomfortable questions. Where are you giving away your leverage just to feel understood? Who in your life relies on your need to explain yourself? What boundaries are you destroying by constantly justifying them? Where are you negotiating your reality with someone who is completely committed to misunderstanding you? And the most dangerous question of all, what would change about your life tomorrow if you simply let them be wrong? The answer is usually quiet, heavy, and profound. Everything changes because you stop wasting your future trying to edit the past. You reclaim the thousands of hours and millions of calories you have spent managing the insecurities of other people. You consolidate your energy. You become a closed system. You become selective, not just about who gets your time, but about who gets your reasons. If this is the kind of psychological architecture you want to build, if you want to understand the invisible dynamics that dictate human behavior before they are used against you, this is what Velvet Dagger is here for. We do not teach motivation, we analyze leverage. If you have recognized your own pattern today, and you are ready to stop paying the invisible tax of the over-explainer, leave this exact phrase in the comments. I let them be wrong. Let it be a public marker of the moment you stopped negotiating your reality. Because once you accept that the world does not need to understand you for you to be effective, a new problem emerges. What happens when the person using silence against you is not an enemy, but someone you trust? What happens when the absence of communication is not a shield, but a weapon designed to make you destroy yourself? That requires a completely different mechanism of defense. We will dissect exactly how to dismantle that game in the next one.